You can't just fire him like this. He's the best chef this place has ever had. The sous chef's voice cracked with emotion as he stood between Marcus and Trevor, the restaurant owner who had barged into the kitchen just minutes before the dinner rush. The elegant dining room of Bellissimo, one of the city's most renowned Italian restaurants, hummed with the gentle murmur of early evening patrons. White tablecloths gleamed under subtle lighting, waitstaff glided between tables with practiced efficiency, and the air carried the intoxicating aroma of fresh herbs and simmering sauces. Behind the polished facade of the dining room, however, the kitchen had erupted into chaos. Marcus Reynolds stood silently, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, chef's coat immaculate despite the long day of preparation. At 6'2", his face carried the lines of someone who had spent decades focused on perfection, but there was nothing severe about him. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and though he stood perfectly straight, there was a gentleness to his demeanor that inspired loyalty rather than fear from his kitchen staff. "I've made my decision," Trevor snapped, running a manicured hand through his styled hair. The 30-something new owner had inherited Bellissimo from his father 3 months ago and had been making improvements ever since. "The food costs are too high, the menu is outdated, and frankly, your methods are too slow. We're not feeding generals anymore, Marcus. This is a business." The kitchen fell silent. The rhythmic chopping of vegetables ceased. The sous chefs froze at their stations. Even the dishwasher stopped loading the industrial machine. 6 years of Marcus's leadership had transformed this kitchen into a well-oiled machine, earning the restaurant its coveted reputation. "Mr. Harrington," Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Perhaps we could discuss your concerns after service tonight. We have reservations for—" "There's nothing to discuss," Trevor cut him off, tugging at the cuffs of his designer suit jacket, completely out of place in the working kitchen. "I've already hired a new executive chef. Someone who understands modern dining trends and how to turn a proper profit. Someone younger, with fresh ideas." Marcus's eyes flickered briefly to the team he'd trained, noting their shocked expressions. Young Maria, the pastry chef, had tears forming. Carlos, his loyal sous chef for 4 years, looked ready to quit on the spot. The kitchen that had been preparing for the evening service just minutes ago now stood frozen in disbelief. "Of course, sir," Marcus said with dignity that seemed to infuriate Trevor even more. "I'll collect my personal tools and be out of your way." Trevor smirked, clearly expecting resistance, perhaps even hoping for it. "Don't bother coming back for the recipe book. Those belong to the restaurant." Marcus nodded once. "Those were always the restaurant's property. I've never claimed otherwise." That seemed to deflate Trevor slightly, robbing him of the confrontation he'd been spoiling for. The kitchen remained unnervingly quiet as Marcus removed his chef's coat, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath. A small pin on the collar caught the light momentarily, but no one seemed to notice it except Carlos, whose eyes widened slightly in recognition. Marcus Reynolds had never been one to boast about his past. None of the staff at Bellissimo knew the full extent of his 23 years in the Marine Corps, where he had risen to the rank of Master Sergeant as a culinary specialist. The small pin Carlos had noticed, a Marine Corps Culinary Excellence Medal, was the only outward sign Marcus ever displayed of his distinguished military career. At 62, Marcus carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that couldn't be faked. His hands, nimble despite years of burns and cuts, moved with practiced precision, whether filleting a delicate sea bass or organizing the chaotic dinner rush. The small scar above his right eyebrow, a souvenir from a kitchen explosion during a deployment in Baghdad, was typically the only thing people noticed about his appearance. He wasn't imposing in stature, standing at an even 5', but his presence commanded respect without demanding it. Before taking over Bellissimo's kitchen, Marcus had transformed 3 struggling restaurants into award-winning establishments. He lived simply in a modest apartment 15-minute ES from the restaurant, arriving each morning at 5 a.m. to receive deliveries personally, inspect every ingredient, and prepare stocks and sauces from scratch. His small bookshelf at home held volumes on international cuisine alongside military strategy manuals, both concerned with precision, timing, and execution. Trevor Harrington couldn't have been more different. The son of Bellissimo's beloved founder, he had spent his life avoiding the family business until his father's passing 3 months ago. With slicked-back hair, designer suits, and a perpetual look of mild disdain, Trevor approached the restaurant as merely another asset in his portfolio. His knowledge of food extended only to the trendy restaurants where he entertained clients for his investment firm, and his idea of kitchen management came from reality television cooking shows. Despite inheriting a profitable establishment with loyal staff and customers, Trevor saw only opportunities for cost-cutting and modernization. Within weeks, he had demanded changes to suppliers, pushing for cheaper alternatives to the carefully sourced ingredients Marcus had built relationships around for years. The handmade pasta that was Bellissimo's signature was now targeted as inefficient, with Trevor suggesting pre-made alternatives that would taste the same to most people. The kitchen staff had watched in growing dismay as their beloved restaurant standards were systematically dismantled. Maria, the pastry chef Marcus had personally mentored from her first job out of culinary school, had threatened to quit twice already. Carlos, whose family recipes had been incorporated into the menu after Marcus recognized their potential, had been fielding job offers but stayed out of loyalty to his mentor. What Trevor didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus had once overseen the culinary operations for 3 forward operating bases during the height of military operations overseas, feeding thousands of troops daily despite supply challenges that would make any civilian chef quit on the spot. He had prepared state dinners for visiting dignitaries in combat zones, transformed military rations into morale-boosting meals, and trained over 200 culinary specialists now serving worldwide. Comment: respect is earned, not demanded, if you believe true leadership comes from service rather than authority. I'll need your keys and passcodes before you leave, Trevor said, holding out his hand expectantly as Marcus carefully folded his chef's coat. The dinner service was scheduled to begin in 45 minutes, and the kitchen remained frozen in disbelief. Carlos will need to know where the supplier contact information is kept, Marcus said calmly, reaching for a small notebook in his locker. And someone should call Paolo about tomorrow's seafood delivery. He always brings extra scallops on Fridays, but we won't need them now if you're changing the menu. Trevor rolled his eyes. I'm sure my new executive chef can handle ordering fish. This isn't rocket science. No, sir, it's not, Marcus agreed without a hint of sarcasm. But Paolo reserves his best catch for us because we've built a relationship over 6 years. He brings the scallops directly from the docks before they go to other restaurants. This is exactly the problem, Trevor snapped, his voice rising. All these special arrangements and personal relationships are costing us money. Do you have any idea what our food costs are compared to industry standards? Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. Our food cost percentage is 32%, which is 4 points below the industry average for fine dining establishments of our caliber. We achieve this through careful portioning and minimal waste, not by compromising on quality. Trevor's face flushed. He hadn't expected Marcus to know the exact numbers. Well, my consultants say we could get it down to 26% with a few simple changes. Such as? Marcus asked, his voice still level but with a new edge of concern. For starters, switching to frozen seafood. No one can tell the difference once it's covered in sauce anyway. And pre-chopped vegetables would save hours of prep time. We're paying skilled labor to do work that comes already done from suppliers. Maria gasped audibly. Carlos stepped forward. Mr. Harrington, those changes would completely undermine what Bellissimo stands for. Your father built this restaurant on. Don't tell me what my father would want, Trevor snarled. He was sentimental about this place. I'm practical. Marcus gently placed his hand on Carlos's shoulder, silently urging restraint. Mr. Harrington, perhaps a gradual transition would be better for maintaining customer satisfaction. Many of our regulars come specifically for dishes we've perfected over years. They won't know the difference, Trevor insisted, checking his watch impatiently. Look, this isn't a negotiation. Marcus, your methods are outdated. All this military precision and from-scratch cooking is inefficient. This isn't a mess hall where you're feeding soldiers who'll eat anything put in front of them. The kitchen staff exchanged glances. Marcus had never spoken much about his military service, but they knew enough to recognize the disrespect in Trevor's words. Actually, sir, Marcus said quietly, military culinary standards are exceptionally high. We're trained to create nutritious, appealing meals under the most challenging circumstances. Trevor barked a laugh. Save the war stories. I've made my decision. At least let him finish tonight's service, Carlos pleaded. The new chef can't possibly step in without. He starts tomorrow. Marcus is done now. Trevor's tone was final, and anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to join him. Marcus raised his hand slightly, preventing what looked like a mass exodus. Don't, he said softly to his team. You all have families to support. He turned back to Trevor and handed over his keys. The supplier contact list is in the top drawer of my desk. The weekend prep instructions are posted on the walk-in door. The special sauces for tonight are labeled and dated in the refrigerator. Anything else? Trevor asked sarcastically. Marcus paused, looking around at the kitchen that had been his pride for 6 years. Yes. The health inspector is scheduled for next Tuesday. I always handle those inspections personally. Trevor smirked. I'm sure we'll manage. Now, if you don't mind, we have a restaurant to run, without you. As Marcus gathered his personal knives, a set he'd carried since his days as a young Marine, the dining room door swung open. A server appeared, looking nervous. Mr. Harrington? There's someone here asking about tonight's special. He seems important. Important? Who is it? Trevor demanded, straightening his tie with an annoyed flick of his wrist. He says he's a colonel. He's with a group of people in suits. They're asking specifically about Chef Reynolds, the server replied, her voice slightly trembling. They've taken a table in the private dining section. Trevor glanced at Marcus with sudden suspicion. Friends of yours coming to make a scene? Before Marcus could answer, the kitchen's double doors swung open with authority. 4 men in dark suits entered first, surveying the room with practiced efficiency. Behind them stood a distinguished older man in a full-dress Marine Corps uniform adorned with rows of colorful ribbons and medals. The gold eagle insignia of a full colonel gleamed on his shoulders. Master Sergeant Reynolds, the colonel said, his voice resonant in the suddenly silent kitchen. He snapped a perfect salute. Without hesitation, Marcus returned the salute with military precision. Colonel Harrison, sir. This is unexpected. The colonel smiled slightly. At ease, Master Sergeant. I was looking forward to your famous Oso Buco tonight. Imagine my surprise when I overheard there might be a change in the kitchen leadership. Trevor stepped forward, extending his hand. Trevor Harrington, owner of Bellissimo. Is there something I can help you with, Colonel? Colonel James Harrison, United States Marine Corps, Director of Military Food Service Operations, Pentagon. The colonel ignored Trevor's outstretched hand, his eyes still on Marcus. I had a Pentagon meeting in the city and made reservations weeks ago specifically to try Master Sergeant Reynolds' cuisine again. Master Sergeant? Trevor repeated, looking confused. 23 years of distinguished service, Colonel Harrison confirmed. But you already knew that when you hired him, surely? As Trevor fumbled for words, the colonel turned back to Marcus. The last time I enjoyed your cooking was at the presidential dinner in 2014. The Secretary of Defense still talks about that meal. The kitchen staff exchanged shocked glances. Presidential dinner? Colonel Harrison gestured to the suited men who had accompanied him. Oh, forgive my poor manners. These gentlemen are from the health department. Since we were discussing Chef Reynolds' impeccable standards, I invited them to join us. One of the men stepped forward, official badge displayed. Health Inspector Davis, sir. We received an anonymous tip about recent changes in food handling procedures at this establishment. Trevor's face went pale. There must be some mistake. We're not scheduled for inspection until next week. Unannounced inspections are standard procedure when we receive credible concerns about food safety. Inspector Davis replied, already donning gloves and removing a clipboard from his briefcase. Colonel Harrison was kind enough to explain some of the changes you've been implementing. The colonel walked around the kitchen slowly, nodding with approval at the immaculate workstations. Master Sergeant Reynolds was responsible for feeding 3,000 Marines daily during Operation Northern Watch. Did you know that, Mr. Harrington? He maintained perfect health and safety records under conditions you couldn't begin to imagine. Trevor swallowed hard. I wasn't aware of Chef Reynolds' full background. Few are, the colonel continued. He's not one to boast. Did you know he received the Culinary Excellence Medal for his service during the embassy siege in Kabul? 72 hours of lockdown, limited supplies, and he managed to feed over 100 diplomats and security personnel while maintaining morale under fire. The kitchen staff stared at Marcus in awe. He stood quietly, neither confirming nor denying the colonel's words. Or perhaps he mentioned training over 200 military chefs who now serve worldwide. No. Colonel Harrison shook his head in mock surprise. Master Sergeant Reynolds was selected to oversee meal preparation for 3 presidential visits to active combat zones. His logistical skills saved countless service members from foodborne illness in environments where such problems could have compromised entire operations. Through the kitchen windows, 2 black SUVs with government plates were now visible, parked directly in front of the restaurant entrance. A young officer in uniform stood beside them, speaking into a radio. "Sir," one of the health inspectors called out, examining the walk-in refrigerator. "I'm finding multiple violations here. Temperature logs inconsistent, several items without proper dating, and the raw chicken is stored above re-additoed products." Another inspector emerged from the dry storage area. "Sir, there are open containers of chemicals stored next to food items here. That's a critical violation." Colonel Harrison raised an eyebrow at Trevor. "Those changes you were implementing, Mr. Harrington, they wouldn't happen to include relaxing the safety protocols that Master Sergeant Reynolds established, would they?" Trevor loosened his tie, suddenly sweating. "We've made some adjustments for efficiency, but nothing that compromises, sir," the first inspector interrupted. "The temperature on this refrigeration unit is reading 48 degrees. Food safety standards require 41 degrees or below. How long has this unit been malfunctioning?" All eyes turned to Trevor, who looked genuinely surprised. I don't know. We have maintenance scheduled, monthly. Daily temperature checks were standard procedure under my supervision," Marcus said quietly. "The unit was working correctly this morning." Colonel Harrison turned to address the entire kitchen staff, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. "For those who don't know, Master Sergeant Reynolds here was one of the most decorated culinary specialists in Marine Corps history. His innovations in field kitchen operations saved the military millions in food waste while improving nutrition for troops in combat zones." Trevor stood speechless as the health inspectors continued their examination, methodically documenting each violation with photographs and detailed notes. "Sir," Inspector Davis called out, "we found evidence of recent changes to the food storage system that directly contradict established safety protocols. Multiple high-risk violations that weren't present in previous inspection reports." Colonel Harrison nodded. "I suspected as much. Mr. Harrington, perhaps you'd like to explain your rationale for dismantling safety procedures implemented by one of the military's most accomplished food safety experts?" Trevor's confidence had evaporated entirely. "I was advised by consultants that certain streamlining measures would improve profitability without affecting quality." The colonel raised an eyebrow. "Indeed. And did these consultants have Master Sergeant Reynolds' 23 years of experience ensuring food safety under the most challenging conditions imaginable?" By now, word had spread throughout the restaurant. Curious diners peered through the kitchen doors, and several waitstaff had gathered at the entrance. The colonel noticed the audience and seemed to make a decision. "Inspector Davis, what's your preliminary assessment of this facility's current operational status?" he asked formally. The inspector looked up from his clipboard, expression grave. "Sir, given the number and severity of the violations documented, coupled with the deliberate dismantling of established safety protocols, I have no choice but to recommend immediate suspension of operations pending complete re-inspection and verification of compliance." Colonel Harrison turned to face Trevor directly. "Mr. Harrington, it appears your streamlining has resulted in what the health department considers an unsafe food preparation environment. A rather serious situation for any restaurant, particularly one with Bellissimo's reputation." Trevor's face had gone from pale to ashen. "This is ridiculous. You can't just shut us down." "Actually," Inspector Davis interjected, "that's precisely what we're obligated to do when we find critical violations that present immediate health risks to the public." The colonel gestured toward the dining room. "Shall we inform your guests, or would you prefer to do so?" Trevor looked frantically around the kitchen, seeming to search for some way out of his predicament. "This is all a misunderstanding. Give me a few days to correct these issues. The violations will be documented and operations suspended today," Inspector Davis said firmly, already preparing the official notice. "You'll need to address all cited issues and pass a complete re-inspection before resuming service." The colonel turned to Marcus, who had been standing quietly throughout the exchange. "Master Sergeant, I find myself suddenly without dinner plans. Perhaps you might join me? There's a matter I'd like to discuss with you." Maria, the pastry chef, stepped forward hesitantly. "Chef Reynolds, is it true? About the presidential dinners and everything?" Marcus nodded slightly. "I served where I was needed. Nothing extraordinary about that." Carlos laughed incredulously. "Nothing extraordinary? Chef, you never told us any of this." "It wasn't relevant to our work here," Marcus replied simply. The colonel smiled. Typical Reynolds modesty. What he's not telling you is that he received personal commendations from 2 presidents for his service, or that he pioneered sustainable cooking techniques in combat zones that have been adopted by military forces worldwide. By now, several patrons had entered the kitchen area, drawn by the commotion. An older gentleman in a well-tailored suit stepped forward. "Reynolds?" "Marcus Reynolds," he asked, studying Marcus's face. "4th Marine Expeditionary Force, Kabul, 2010? Marcus nodded, recognition dawning. "Ambassador Collins." The man turned to the growing crowd. "This man saved over 100 lives during the embassy siege. When we were cut off for 3 days, he somehow managed to create nutritious meals from practically nothing. Kept morale up when we thought we might not make it out." Another diner stepped forward. "I was stationed at Camp Leatherneck in 2012. Master Sergeant Reynolds transformed our mess hall from the worst in the region to the best. Men and women would volunteer for extra duties just to get assigned to his dining facility." The kitchen had grown crowded now, with the health inspectors continuing their work while the revelations about Marcus unfolded. Trevor stood against the wall, watching his authority diminish with each new story about the chef he'd just fired. Inspector Davis approached with official documents. "Mr. Harrington, I need you to sign this acknowledgement of the suspension notice. Operations must cease immediately, and the premises must be cleared." 3 months later, Bellissimo reopened with a line of eager patrons stretching around the block. The gold-embossed menu now featured a special section titled, "From the Master Sergeant's Kitchen," highlighting dishes inspired by Marcus's military service around the world. The restaurant's ownership had changed hands following the health department's intervention. Unable to weather the scandal and financial impact of the closure, Trevor had been forced to sell his controlling interest to a restaurant group that specialized in preserving landmark establishments. Their first action had been to rehire Marcus as executive chef with complete creative control over the kitchen. The pristine kitchen now featured a framed photograph of a much younger Marcus in his dress blues, receiving the Culinary Excellence Medal from a smiling president. Beside it hung a new mission statement: "Excellence through service, in every meal, for every guest." Once a month, Bellissimo closed to regular patrons for a special dinner service. On these evenings, the restaurant filled with veterans from local shelters and transition programs. The meals were provided at no cost, and each event concluded with information about culinary training opportunities for those interested in the field. Carlos, now promoted to sous chef, guided a team that included 3 veterans in culinary apprenticeships. Maria had developed a dessert program inspired by international flavors Marcus had encountered during his deployments. The kitchen operated with the precision and respect that had been its hallmark under Marcus's previous tenure, but now with an added sense of purpose. Colonel Harrison became a regular patron, often bringing Pentagon officials and visiting dignitaries to experience what he called the best example of veteran excellence in the civilian sector. His military culinary division had established a formal partnership with Bellissimo, creating pathways for transitioning military culinary specialists into high-end restaurant positions. On this particular evening, Marcus moved through the dining room in his chef's coat, now adorned with a small American flag pin and his Marine Corps emblem. He paused at a table where a young veteran in a wheelchair was enjoying his risotto. "The seasoning reminds me of the mess at Camp Lejeune," the young man said with a smile. "Best food I had during my entire service." Marcus nodded. "That's intentional. Sometimes the familiar flavors help with the transition back home." As he returned to the kitchen, Marcus passed the former storage area that now housed a training center for veterans interested in culinary careers. The sign on the door read, "Service continues, the next mission." The restaurant that had nearly fallen victim to profit-driven shortcuts had transformed into something far more meaningful, a bridge between worlds that honored service while creating new opportunities. In the end, it wasn't just about food. It was about recognition that the skills veterans bring too. Civilian life are forged through experience most can't imagine, and that sometimes, the most decorated heroes are the ones who never speak of their service at all.